Welcome to the Vegceps versus Vegan Gains White Privilege Debate Overview. Now, I know I put this video off for a while, but today we're going to be going through the debate and we're going to explain why Vegan Gains is wrong about white privilege. So no more talk, let's get right into it.
Whether or not white privilege exists, we're going to discuss the topic. And I asked Vegceps what he defines as white privilege, like what it means. And you said white privilege is a special right or advantage available only to whites due to their color.
Yeah, in America.
Yeah, okay, in America.
So right off the bat, I had to make it clear that I was speaking only about white privilege in America. I don't care to argue issues that are not occurring in my country, whereas people like Vegan Gains try to argue issues that are not occurring in his own country, whereas he lives in Canada, and I was just discussing what was going on in America, which is why he did so poorly, as you'll see later on in this debate.
Okay. So I just wrote out a list of disagreements, and I just wanted to go through this list, and then I guess we can just continue the discussion on from there. It'll only take about 5 minutes for me to list my disagreements. That cool?
Sure.
Without interruption, and then we can just discuss after that. Okay. So this idea that you can just make assumptions about an individual or group, being privileged when you don't know anything about their who they are personally, where they came from, how they grew up, or what struggles they faced, in my opinion, is racist. I don't see any meaningful distinction between accusing a white person of being privileged solely based on their skin color and calling the police on a black person when they make an extremely large deposit at a bank, because there's no way a black person could earn that much money legally.
So here, Vegan Gains is implying that accusing a black person of being poor just because they're black is the same thing as accusing a white person of having privilege just because they're white. But it's not the same at all, because we actually had events like segregation and slavery, which allowed white people complete domination over black people, whereas there's no laws that say black people absolutely have to be poor. So there's no reason to assume that.
The idea of white privilege also promotes prejudice against whites, as you're essentially saying a white person's success is largely due to their skin color, not the content of their character, their hard work, skill, or intelligence.
The concept of white privilege has never suggested that white people in America do not have to work for what they have, but black people in America just have to work a lot harder on average for what they have.
The idea of white privilege also at the very least implies that white people as a whole are racist, as white privilege would likely not even exist if the majority of whites weren't racist.
White privilege doesn't start with the individuals, it starts with the government and the systemic racism that has been implemented into the history of America. Like, I don't know, slavery or segregation, things that weren't even abolished over 200 years ago. It's not a white person's fault that they have privilege in America, like Richard is suggesting, but rather the government and people who deny their privilege.
Some white people are going to be minorities in their own community. There are some predominantly black neighborhoods where white people are a minority in their communities or in their neighborhoods and might have more trouble finding a job. Some black people might be more...
In poor areas, most of the people that own the businesses aren't black.
Okay, dude. Please don't interrupt me.
So here, Richard basically just proves he doesn't know what he's talking about. He implies that in areas where the black population is higher, that it's easier for them to get jobs and that they own more businesses. This is false, because usually black populated areas are more poor, so it'd be unlikely for a black person to even own a business anyways. It's usually foreigners and white people owning businesses in black populated areas. So Richard was spewing very false statements, and as I tried to interrupt him and explain my reasoning for why he was wrong, he just kept spamming, "Don't interrupt me, don't respond to my nonsense," because it's not like this is a debate anyways.
Most sports are dominated by blacks, and again, it's very likely partly due to some just God-given, I don't believe in God, but God-given talent, just genetic advantages they have.
So here Richard lied again. He implied that most sports are dominated by black people. That's false. The two most popular sports, basketball and football, are dominated by black people, whereas things like golf, hockey, baseball, any other sport you can name are dominated by white people. And soccer, we already know who dominates that sport. It's not white or black people.
Okay, Daniel Shaver.
So in this situation, Richard is trying to compare the death of Daniel Shaver to that of Elijah McClain. And if you don't know of those two incidents, I suggest you look them up. I will have 2 links to each story in the description. But Elijah McClain was a young black man with special needs, nicest guy ever, had no weapon on him. And he was given a drug by 2 cops that caused him to die. And this was supposed to get him to calm down. But at the time of him given this drug, he was already passed out by the cops basically choking him out. And Daniel Shaver was a guy who was drunk, and he was waving a BB gun out of his hotel window. So the cops showed up. He couldn't follow instructions, and they murdered him. But I still see that as an unjustifiable murder. But in this case, it's not comparable to what happened to Elijah McClain.
He was.
Okay, no, not at all. Don't even go there.
What are you talking about?
No, because he was drunk and he couldn't pay attention to instructions. He actually had a gun and he was pointing out the window. Okay,
he didn't have a gun. He had a BB gun. He didn't have a gun. He had a BB gun. He didn't have a gun. He had a BB gun.
He had a weapon. They knew he actually had a deadly weapon.
He didn't have a deadly weapon. He had a BB gun that he used for exterminating animals. He wasn't armed at the time when he was shot. Listen. I let you talk. You have to let me talk, dude.
You need to answer what relevance that has to Elijah McClain. When he literally couldn't follow instructions, he had a deadly weapon on him. And
he didn't have a deadly weapon. He had a fucking BB gun, and it wasn't even on him at the time. What the fuck are you talking about? You're literally lying at this point. You're fucking just flat out lying. You're full of shit. The guy didn't have a deadly weapon. He had a fucking BB gun in his fucking apartment room. And then when he was called out by the fucking police, he had no fucking weapon on him whatsoever. He was clearly unarmed. He was asked to even lift up his fucking shirt, and you could see he had no fucking weapon on him. Then they told him to do stupid shit like cross his legs, like walk on the fucking floor, put his hands up in the air when he was supposed to fucking crawl when he can't even fucking do that? Dude, you're fucking flat out lying. Dude, people get shot by the police whether they're fucking white and black unjustifiably.
They never told him to walk on the floor. What are you talking about? They never even told him.
They told him to crawl on the floor with his fucking legs crossed, and they told him to do it while his hands were up in the air.
So Elijah McClain had no weapon at all, and you're saying a BB gun cannot be deadly? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. It doesn't have the fucking capability of being lethal.
You can look up death by BB gun on the internet right now.
You realize that's incredibly fucking rare. There's more deaths from fucking people smashing somebody with a fucking bottle. Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Thanks for admitting that it can be a deadly weapon.
Okay, my fists are a deadly weapon. Okay, my hands are a deadly weapon now because you can choke somebody to death with your hands. You can beat them up. Okay, anything's a deadly fucking weapon now.
So I made a mistake here and I said that Daniel Shaver had a deadly weapon when in fact he didn't. He had a BB gun, which can potentially be a deadly weapon. And then Vegan Gains counters that by saying, okay, what about your fists? You know, is that a deadly weapon? Well, that doesn't really help your case in forms of argument, because if you do try and beat up a cop, they will shoot you and it will be marked as justified. So in that case, it wouldn't be called murder.
You know, police brutality is occurring to white people. They get justice most of the time.
Okay, so you just admitted it's not universally true that white people have an advantage.
It doesn't have to be universal.
Yeah, it kind of does for you to stereotype an entire, like an individual or an entire group saying just based on your skin color, you have an advantage. Absolutely.
So by universal,
for it to be justified, for you to even stereotype them, it has to be universally true.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely does.
What do you mean by universal?
That everyone in the group has that advantage. Like, it's even in your fucking statement. Like, what did you say? Let me go back up.
It's more of a privilege to be born human than it is an animal.
That statement doesn't even make sense to me. Like, we have rights that animals don't have.
So Richard's main argument against the concept of white privilege the entire debate was that it's not universally true. And this basically means that not every single white person is going to be advantaged compared to a black person. And then when I brought up the fact that not every single animal is going to be disadvantaged in correlation to a human, that doesn't mean human privilege doesn't exist, because humans are definitely privileged compared to animals. Since the day animals are born, they get on this earth, they have a death sentence set out for them. When you're a human, you don't have to worry about being killed just for being born a human. But he just ignored that. He ignored it because he knew it would basically destroy his entire argument, and he'd potentially end up losing the debate, as he did, which you'll see in a bit.
You're saying for it to be universal, it has to happen to literally every single white person or whatever, or every single black person has to be discriminated against, which is not true. It's like saying, oh, for it to be animal agriculture to be universal, or human privilege to be universal, every animal has to get treated worse than every human. That's what you're basically saying, and that's not the case. Some farmed animals can escape the slaughterhouse, and they can have a nice, place in the sanctuary or something like that. And then there could be a homeless person who is less fortunate than an animal.
Okay.
Does that just mean human privilege doesn't exist because I guess a farmed animal that escaped the slaughterhouse has it better than a human? So human privilege just doesn't exist,
Yeah, I have an issue with using that term.
Richard, having a problem with the term doesn't make the term any less valid.
I don't understand what this has to do with white privilege. Just the concept is really confusing to me.
We said at the beginning of the debate, white privilege is a special right or advantage given only to white people in America.
Okay, so is there such thing as black privilege?
God.
Okay, so is there such thing as black privilege?
Okay, so explain in what situation would there be black privilege? In what situation does a black person make a white person get out of their seat legally? And it was implemented into the law.
Okay, I don't know about a situation.
So Richard actually went as far to say that black privilege exists in America as a cover for his stupidity. But when I asked him for a segregation law favored to black people, he couldn't give me an answer.
Like that in particular, but I mean, you can find black people being able to say certain things that white people can't say, or else they'll get socially ostracized or canceled. Like the N-word. N-word's a perfect example.
I don't say the N-word. I don't think it's good that other black people...
What the fuck? Okay, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? What the fuck does that have to do with anything? Nothing. So,
yes, it does. Yes, it does. I don't say the N-word.
Just because you don't personally use the N-word, that doesn't mean...
Ancestors use that word to discriminate. Ancestors use that word to discriminate. Ancestors use that word to discriminate against my people. Why should they...
So that was by far the worst argument that Richard has given the entire debate. He implied that because black people can get away with saying the N-word, it's a privilege because white people will get criticized and canceled for saying the N-word because it's a crappy thing to say. That's just that. If a black celebrity says a crappy thing, they're going to get canceled too. So this has nothing to do with black or white privilege. It has something to do with the fact that if you say crappy things, you're going to get a crappy reaction.
It absolutely is an assumption. What, you're telling me? You're telling me I'm disadvantaged compared to a fucking white homeless person?
No, because white privilege has been implemented into the American system, okay? Because of the history of discrimination against black people in the past, it's been passed on. So it's not an assumption to say that when it was literally in the American law that a black person had to give up their seat for a white person, and you even said then that wouldn't be even considered white privilege, because that actually is universal. In America back then, any black person would have to give up their seat if a white person wanted.
Actually, look that up.
So this is probably the saddest part of the debate. Richard actually thought he was obligated to have a debate about white privilege, and he didn't even know what segregation was. He had no idea about it, which is why I'm so curious as to why a Canadian kid is so set on arguing about white privilege in America. It just didn't end well for him.
I don't know if that was a law or if that was just a social standard.
No,
Let me
actually,
look that up. Was it a law? Was it a law? Was it a law? Oh, okay, so it was a segregation law, and this was only one, like, this was in the southern states. So you did have to give up your seat for a white passenger. It was part of a segregation law.
Wow, Richard, you just now figured that out, huh? Did you also know that if a white woman were to claim that a black man were raping her, even though she was a participant in their sexual relationship, that he could get lynched, murdered, and thrown into prison? It happened a lot back then. You should search that up too.
But, look, again,
So it's white privilege.
like, again, you
Oh my
keep...
God.
Okay, look, again, you keep changing the topic. Like, I can agree with you. Like, look, let's agree just for the sake of argument, and I agree with some of the things you're saying. I can agree that things like systemic racism exist. I can agree that there are some institutions that are by design racist. And I can agree that, okay, let's say in general, black people have it harder.
So at this point, Richard agrees with basically everything I was telling him in the first place. So at this point, there was really no point for this debate to go on. I had already won the debate right there. He had admitted everything I wanted him to admit, that white people have it easier. And it's not even black people that have it harder. It's every other race besides white people who have it harder in America. So Richard lost the debate. I'm glad that we had the conversation, and I hope he could have got something positive out of it. I hope he learned something. And that's going to close out this video, so leave your thoughts down below and try to keep it positive, or you'll probably be blocked. And be sure to check out the other videos on the channel right now.